Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Zara. I'm going to be doing a review of Hall of Bones by Tim Hardie. This is the third book that I am reviewing in my self-published spotlight. Now, Tim reached out to me a couple of months back now, I think, and he offered to send me a copy of his book. Funnily enough, the book was already on my radar and I'd already had it in my wish list, so was more than happy for him to send me a copy and for me to review it. I ended up reading it in September, and I have to say it was a pretty wild ride, and it's a really good self-published fantasy book. Now this is a book that is, I would say it's quite like Viking inspired. A lot of the characters' names, which I'll come on to later, feel quite familiar if you're used to reading Viking inspired literature or watching Viking inspired movies and TV shows, which I have watched many of. It felt familiar but not too familiar, so it was this new world, and I was really excited to learn about each of these different characters and families and the politics at play. The quick summary of this plot is that we are following a young man called Hrothgar and his family's quest to retain power. Lots of stuff happens, and I could go into more detail, but I think this is one of those books where it's best to go into it not knowing too much about it, because there's some surprises along the way that I did not see coming. There was one in particular that I didn't see coming, and I loved it. I was here for it. So without further ado, let's jump into what I liked about it. So the number one thing that I loved about it, and this is not going to be a surprise to anybody, is the characters. The characters felt really distinct. There's a really wide list of characters, and thankfully Tim has a character list at the start of this book, so you kind of know who is who and where they are and what they're doing. The characters, even though there are so many, they all feel distinct, they all feel thought out, and they all feel like they belong, if that makes sense. Like, none of the characters feel like it's a waste to have them there. Like, every character has a role to play, and it's a role that's really important to the core story. Hrothgar is the main character, and he's a young man at the start, and he's your typical kind of young man, has potential, don't really know where he's going to end up. He has an older brother who is the heir to his family's land, and his father is very powerful, and so he is, I think he's second in line if I remember correctly, but he is, he's quite unassuming, right? He doesn't really have a place, so he kind of needs to figure out that place. We see him in a way where heroes typically start. He builds up his physical strength, he's clearly very intelligent, he has a strategic mind, he's very good at bringing people together. But there's a twist with Hrothgar's character that I have never seen before in fantasy, and I loved it. I'm not going to say what that twist is because I don't want to ruin it, and I think you should experience it for yourself. But there is a twist at some point in the book that is really satisfying and takes his character in a way that I did not expect. I loved it, and I think if you like fantasy and you've read a lot of fantasy and you've specifically read a lot of coming of age stories, you're going to really love this one. The other thing about Hrothgar that I'll mention is that normally by the end of the first book you have a very clear idea as to where the hero's journey is going to end. I have no clue with Hrothgar, and that just makes me really excited to read the next book, which I'm hoping to read next month. So I cannot wait to see how his journey continues on. In terms of other characters, there were two female characters that I really enjoyed. They're very, strong female characters, and I really enjoyed getting their perspectives, and that was Etta. Etta is almost like the right hand of his father, and she's very intelligent, like very intelligent, and she is often the person pulling the puppet strings in the background. And as we all know, I love characters like that. And then the other one is Nuna, who is Hrothgar's sister. She's initially presented as this kind of very quiet, unassuming individual. By the end of the book, she's this incredibly strong character who's gone through a lot of growth. And I have a feeling that she's going to play a really critical role in the later books. There were some other characters that I really liked, but at the risk of this running too long, I'm just going to stop there because there's a lot of characters that I really liked. And I think if you like having a wide cast of characters, then you're going to really enjoy this book. It actually reminds me a little bit of The Faithful and the Fallen by John Gwynne, where you have so many different characters. We don't get as many POVs as that, thankfully. It was a bit too many POVs for me, but it works in this, and if you like a wide cast, you're gonna love it. The next thing that I really love is the political intrigue. I did not expect there to be this much political intrigue in this book, and I cannot wait to see the you know, how that continues to shape up in book 2. I hope we get more of it, because Tim does a really good job of weaving all of these different family lines, all these different like subplots together, without making it feel like, you know, you have to keep track of everything in your head, because he also kind of reminds you. For me, if you can combine political fantasy into your book, it's going to be a dead ringer that I like it, as long as you execute it well, and he absolutely did. The other thing that I really loved are the themes. Lots of themes, you know, there's a whole theme around like family and found family, justice versus revenge, finding one's purpose. There's this whole theme about like recovery, which I really enjoyed and I also wasn't expecting and I really liked. I think the way that he pairs the thematic work with the character work is just really satisfying, because I felt like everything had a role to play, like everything had a purpose. And I've read quite a lot of fantasy now, and quite a lot of fantasy is very overdone, if that makes sense, where there are things that you could quite easily cut from it and you wouldn't be missing anything from it. And I don't think we get that with this book. It's very impressive, honestly, for, I think, a debut author. And even if he wasn't a debut, it would still be very impressive, because I think it's so hard to do. The last thing that I'm going to mention that I really enjoyed about this is that it has kind of the kind of classic hallmarks of like epic fantasy. There's some parts of his writing that made me think of Lord of the Rings, which was a really pleasant surprise. It's almost like a subtle nod to Lord of the Rings. I'm sure there's other franchises in there as well, but Lord of the Rings is the one that came to mind for me. There's this one bit that reminds me of the part when Theoden gets released from the kind of hold that is on him, and there's one scene in the book that particularly reminded me of that, and I was like, Tim must have got some influence from Lord of the Rings. I could be wrong, but that's what I felt like, and it was really nice to kind of have that throwback. I think if you're a big reader of classic epic fantasy, this has got a lot of the things that you're going to really love. And as somebody who doesn't read tons of epic fantasy, I love them because I just think they were executed really well. And now for the things that you might struggle with. So the first thing was the pacing. It's quite slow. I don't mind that. I've read a lot of books with slow starts. I don't mind a slow book, to be honest, as long as the characters are interesting. I think for me, it worked because we got a lot of context on the world and the politics and the factions and the families and the characters. So for me, it was fine. But if you are somebody who's incredibly sensitive to that, then I think, you know, make sure that you're in the mood for it. And then the second thing was the only thing I would have liked more of was more world building. I'm not a massive world building type person, but I like a bit of world building. I like to get a sense of the place so that I can kind of build an image in my mind. I think we got a little bit, but we didn't get as much as I'd like. So I'm hoping we get more of that in the next book, which I'm really excited to read in a couple of weeks. So as I've mentioned before, I don't do ratings on self-published books, but this is a book that I really loved. And that's quite telling from me, because I don't typically love epic fantasy. But this is a really solid start to what is shaping up to be a really amazing trilogy. And I think if you're looking to go on a nice ride, a nice journey with some of these characters, then I think you're going to really enjoy it, because there's a lot happening, but it doesn't feel like it, which is a good thing. So there we have it, folks. Let me know what you think. And if you have any questions about the book, shout out to Tim for sending me the first book and now the second book, and I can't wait to read it. I'll definitely do a review of that once I finished it towards the end of this year, but otherwise I will see you down in the comments. Thanks for watching, stay safe, take care, and I'll speak to you soon.